welcome everyone. Tremendously excited to kick off this part of the track of the ASU+GSV Summit. We've got two all-star authors and guests and doers and practitioners here with us today, and hopefully you all are here for, the title is Authors Reimagining Career Education to Prepare Kids for Success. But the framing I want to give up front, of course, is Gene Eddy's terrific book, Crisis Proofing Today's Learners, and Elliot Washor's book, second book, but this is the most recent, Learning to Leave, How Real-World Learning Transforms Education. I'm going to get them to sign it afterwards, not on stage right now. But the part that I want to lean in on at first is actually a bigger subtext as we come together. Because as you both know, right now, mental health challenges of our youth, we're very aware of it. There are two books about this that are, John Haidt, he's sort of the Roy Kent right now of education. He's here, there, and everywhere. Of course, Abigail Schreier, her book as well about bad therapy. And it just strikes me, and I want to start with you, Elliot, and then Gene, you can jump in afterwards, putting you right on the spot. But it strikes me that as you look at these questions, that your books actually have something to say about this mental health challenge and maybe chronic absenteeism more broadly in engagement of America's youth. So I'd love to hear, as you reflect about these crises, your own prescription and perhaps, or diagnosis and prescription.
Sure. Hello. Am I on? Yeah? All right. I can't hear it, but I got a little problem with my ear, so what can I say? So really, the first book that I wrote dealt with this around disengagement, and sometimes after COVID, or we'll argue still in COVID, a crisis emerges that was already a crisis, and the narrative changes around that crisis, around mental health and absenteeism. And that's what really the first book was about. And that's the work that we do at Big Picture, is to engage young people through their interests around how they find meaning in their lives, through the work that they do and the community that they're in and the people that they know. And that's a really, really important piece. We figured out a long time ago that the mental health piece, and this goes back to Man's Search for Meaning and Viktor Frankl, as a researcher, not as a concentration camp victim, but he researched women in a psychiatric hospital. And he found that they were there because they lacked meaning in their lives. And I would argue that when young people go into schools and there's nothing there that's who they are, and the school is not paying attention to what matters to them, and there's an overregulation of getting yourself outside to do the things that you really want to do in creative ways and less risk-averse ways that schools operate in, that's going to impact you, and that's going to impact your mental health. So you could argue that you can walk into school and come out sicker than when you walk in, because students are so disengaged in what's going on for the next 6 hours. So what we think about is how to engage students around their interests in and outside of school, but a lot of times outside of school. That's where their creativity is. That's where new arts, new sciences, new ways of living happen. And if you don't allow that to happen inside the school, of course they're going to be disengaged, and of course their mental health is going to change and suffer. And then add on to that the ranking system that we have in schools around assessment, SAT scores, GPAs, class rank, and you hear students who really are looking for meaning in their lives, and a lot of times have it outside of school where it is a joy, they lack that inside of school. Well, fast forward. Absenteeism. So why are they absent? They're absent. If you look at the Fed data, it'll tell you academic failure, behavior, those kinds of things. But really, there are other conditions like finding meaning in your life, what matters to you, which schools don't really pay attention to in a direct way, and they have to. Our opinion is they must do that. They're not asked what their interests are, starting in kindergarten all the way through grade 12, and they're not pursuing those interests. They're not known by their teachers in their schools around those interests and doing something about it. And so interest, meaning, mattering, unrecognized talents, and I would add a fourth thing, which would be the overregulation of school. So if you look at the data around schools and movement inside of a school of a student has less movement than a U.S. Marine recruit or a convicted felon in a prison. They can't even go to the bathroom without getting permission. And that's become worse and worse because of how schools and litigation is around school safety. There's ways of doing this very, very differently, and I could talk about that for a long time, but I'll stop there. So absenteeism, mental health, one it has to do with the other. They're intertwined. And unless we engage young people in the things that matter to them and what's meaningful to them, it's going to keep on happening. It's not new. It's something that's been going on for generations. You can look back in songs, go back to Chuck Berry and School Days, okay? Go back to Blackboard Jungle, and you can see the same things happening in schools that we see now. The difference is there's a narrative around it because of COVID.
I don't know if I can follow you, Elliot.
You mean you didn't understand what I said, or you can't?
No. I'm always in a position where if I'm ever on a panel with Elliot, I'm like, okay, now what am I going to say? Because you just said everything. But let me just give you my view on it. I think that there is something to be said about kids and relevance. They have to be able to see something that means something to them as they are in school every day. I was sitting at a dinner last night and talking to a young man who was asking me about ASA and what ASA did, and he said to me, "Have you ever heard about Ikigai?" And I smiled, and I said,
"It's a whole chapter."
Yes, that I wrote about it because I am a firm believer in it. And many of the things that Elliot just said about a kid being able to discover what it is they love to do, but also what they're good at. An awful lot of kids that we survey will say that they're in high school and they don't know what they're good at yet. So we've done something wrong in this process that we haven't allowed kids to figure that out. But if we can identify that and then take the learnings that kids are getting in high school, or for that matter, any age, and show the relevance of what that means to their lives, kids are going to want to engage. They're going to want to stay in school. They're going to want to have kind of the fulfillment on that dream of theirs that for so many kids just isn't out there.
So I want to stay with Eugene then on this and stay on this topic before we level up. Just one more, because when John Haidt, of course, writes about this, he lays the blame at sort of what Elliot just talked about, the lack of freedom in outdoor play and so forth, and then an over-reliance on social media and digital media. But in your book, you actually say those can be great conduits to learning about the world and developing a connection with other people, developing purpose, opportunities, and things of that nature. So I was sitting there in dialogue with his book, in dialogue with your book, and I was like, I would love to hear Jean just talk about what John said and what she thinks is the right way to think about this.
I think, as with everything in this life, there's got to be a balance. And the kids that we are talking about right now today have been on an iPad or a mobile device since they could pretty much stand up. You know, swipe right, swipe left. This is not a new territory by any stretch of the imagination. The one thing that our schools don't do and can't do, frankly, is they cannot identify every young person's learning style. There are some kids who need more. There are some kids who need more individual attention. There are some kids who need to go out, do it on their own, fail, and come back and try and do it again. All of the things that a digital experience can provide are that. And certainly we do an awful lot with digital at ASA. And I will simply say this, for the amount of hours that young people spend on their mobile devices, in social media, in digital platforms, if we do it the right way and offer up things that are fun, but also educational at the same time, we can have the best of both worlds.
And I suppose get out of that comparison that Elliot was talking about as well. I want to up-level and talk about the frame for both of your books now. And Elliot, I'll start with you on this. Just, 10 years after the publication of your original book, Leaving to Learn, which you talked about, then you have this, which is Learning to Leave.
Right.
So you flipped the title.
Always do.
You've updated some thinking, and you talk about the 10 years. Andrew gets a little shout out there for prompting you to write this in the book. You sort of have updated what you all have been up to. But talk to us about why the need for a second book, why flipping the lens, what's the foundational purpose or underpinning of this second book?
Well, if you read the first book, there wouldn't be a need for the second book. Maybe I paid attention to it, but really it was Andrew and Jean and Judy who said, "Oh, it's been 10 years since you wrote the first book. Why don't you write another book?" I had no intention of writing a book. But we have done, as big picture, we always maintain our edge. We're not a center-to-edge organization because we don't believe that you can start at the center and get to the edge. Just like with young people, they have an edge. They're young, they're risk-averse, and they go to the edge to find their center. And we believe that adults also, in any kind of world that we're in, have to go to the edge to find their center. This kind of sounds simple, but it has to do with a pool shot, believe it or not. But I won't go into that. So the need for the second book was to just update people on initiatives that we had going on that involve engaging young people, both in and outside of school. And one of those is crediting learning through something called the International Big Picture Learning Credential outside, that credits learning in and outside of school. We've always done that, but we found a way to present that to universities, workplaces, and technical schools. So that was really the reason. The first book was really written for teachers, leaving to learn. This is how you learn to leave to learn, get your students out. And the second book was around learning to leave, which is what those initiatives are.
Gotcha. Okay, Jean, let's talk about your book. It's gotten some high praise, including from Deborah Quazzo here. She says, to do this, it requires a radical rethinking of what it is to deliver education and skills to the upcoming generations. And crisis-proofing our youth is the answer. And we know how to do it, as Jean so aptly points out. So talk to us about this book, Crisis Proofing Today's Learner, and why you wrote it. What's your why?
I wrote it for a few reasons. I think, I believe fervently that we are letting our kids down, that we have generations of kids who are graduating from high school and they don't have a plan. I worked in higher ed for a lot of years before I started my work at ASA, and I would have to say I counseled many young people in college, not all, but many, who really didn't understand why they were there. And they thought that college was going to be the answer, that they were going to magically, in year 4, figure out what it is they wanted to do and be able to go and do it. And for some, that happens. But for a lot, it does not happen. And so, to me, if we can arm young people with the information that they need so that they start making choices much earlier on, and I'm not saying pick a career when you're in middle school. What I'm saying is if you can identify some of the careers that might align with the things that you love and really makes your heart beat faster, then you have an opportunity to make good choices about classes in high school, but also pathways, whatever they might be. It could be college, but it could be a training program, a certificate program, any of those kinds of things. And I think what really prompted bringing all these things together was what happened with the pandemic. And people just got thrown into total disarray. We left an awful lot of kids by the wayside. When people went to Zoom in school, An awful lot of kids just didn't go. I mean, the learning loss that we're experiencing is pretty significant. I would say that if we had learned how to do a better job in working with a hybrid approach between digital outreach as well as in-school learning, that we could have the best of both worlds. And that's what I truly believe is what's going to help all kinds of learners to get them on a pathway where they make good decisions at the end of the road.
So let's stay on this for 1 second, because one of the critical arguments in the book, and frankly, your argument for as long as I've known you, has been that the age that we start this does matter. And that middle school is actually a great, like, you get a lot of head nods when we say high school. Increasingly, I hear a lot of people open to flipping the school day, doing a lot of what, Elliot, you all have been doing for a long time now. But, right? But middle school, you argue, is actually a crucial point at which to start this career exploration and starting to understand strengths, opportunities, potential, how you can contribute. We'll talk about why.
So when we first started to go down the road of what was our best opportunity to impact young people on this journey, we did an awful lot of research, and we talked to really, I would say, inspiring faculty at places like UVA, NYU, et cetera. And I was amazed to find out that a kid who's in 7th and 8th grade, and I'm talking 12-year-old, 13-year-old kids, their minds are like sponges. They're almost as sponge-like as a toddler's. And the other beauty about that is that, so they want to absorb information, they want to take it in and do stuff with it, but they are not to the point in time where what their friends think dictates the day. The older a young person gets as they move into high school, it's what are my friends doing? What do I want my friends to see me doing, etc. And this is a perfect time to have young people be able to go and do that exploration, self-knowledge, and opportunities that are out there before all those things set in. And the other thing that I talk to a lot of teachers about is the fact that when kids are in middle school, they're making choices about what they're taking in high school. And oftentimes, if they don't have some kind of direction about what they might want to do, they don't take the classes they need in high school, and then suddenly, when they go to that next thing, they don't have the basis for what they need.
So on that then, Elliot, you talk a lot about third spaces, right? And these opportunities basically for educational experiences that bring together students and our education system with industry and community partners. Talk about what that looks like and why it's so important in your vision, and this role specifically of intermediaries that you talk a lot about facilitating this.
Once again, these are trying to do short answers.
It's all good. We're having a conversation.
Yeah, no, not really. So in the book, I give an interesting story that relates to my family and one of my uncles who was at birth had tuberculosis, and they did some kind of operation on him. This is in the early 1900s. And he was real small and hunched over, hard to look at. And my other uncle, they had a cigar stand, newsstand in the tallest building in New York City at the time, on 10 East 40th, which I used to go to eat candy. I stopped eating candy a while back. Anyhow, Harold went to a school called Westinghouse High School, vocational school in New York City. And they put him there not because he was smart, not smart. They put him there because he was hard to look at. And there's a longer part of that story. So we fast forward to the era of Biggie Small, Busta Rhymes, Little Kim, and Jay-Z. Guess where they end up? Westinghouse High School. And they're not put there for their musical ability. When I was doing a talk like this a little while back, I said, and I was corrected, 3 out of 4 of those people didn't graduate high school. I was corrected because the principal of that school was in the audience at the time. He says, none of them graduated. To the point the point is that outside of school, there was all this creativity. The invention of hip-hop, the invention of a lot of different things going on. In the arts, graffiti, the same thing. All of a sudden, graffiti, you got more graffiti on your building, it's worth more now in New York City. How does that happen? Well, those young people are at their edge, and they're playing with stuff, and school does not allow that. But what if we did? What if we followed, and this is what we do, the interests and choices of each and every young person, and we started the first middle school in the United States, arguably, 1971, and they don't look like the one we started because they had advisory in it, all that stuff. But what if we followed them out and made sure, like the story of Icarus, that when you fly too close to the sun, you fall and you're dead, you have an adult support. God forbid, but bad things can happen. You have an adult support as an intermediary while you're out there who's connecting your work back, that you're doing out there, back into the building or into a third space of a Boys and Girls Club or a YMCA or whatever that, a church, it really doesn't matter. Those are places of learning. And so we figured that out a long time ago, that 2 days a week in our schools, students are out around their interests. And that could start very, very early, as soon as those interests start. And if you read the data on infants, by the time a child is 3 years old, they're already identifying interests, not one, but many. And they're identifying people who they want to learn from. I want to learn from you, Grandma. You're not teaching me how to tie my shoe. Grandpa's teaching me how to tie my shoe. This is built into our biology. This is who we are. Schools do not pay attention to that. They pay attention to a curriculum that is very, very rigid and delivered on a narrow band of how you are smart. And that's giving them, maybe us, too much credit for that, because it really doesn't show that. You have to look at the whole child. So all that said, getting young people out, putting an intermediary in place so they don't harm themselves, and they know the adult mentor who they're working with, and they know the workplace, and the young person likes the place where they're at, you can get a lot out of that experience. You can bring the academics to it, and you can bring the outside in and the inside out.
So we've gone from the why into the what, and I want to go into your what now, because ASA similarly has done a lot in building spaces, often digital spaces, to help young people make these connections, create these opportunities for themselves. Talk about that work.
So I think that, and again, we formulated these programs prior to the pandemic. It was really kind of unbelievable to me. We had just started into this space and realized that if we wanted to impact the number of kids that we needed to do something that was far more scalable than working with one school at a time. And certainly, we work with programs that actually infiltrate schools, and there are people in this audience where we work really closely with. But when we developed these programs, our digital programs, it happened at a time, we started it February 1, and then COVID hit and everything closed down on March 13th. But the first thing we did was we developed videos that kids could look at that basically showed what someone of their own age was doing about following someone around who they might want to be or have that career. Or one of my favorites is having a young person do a pitch competition to her parents about something that she wanted to do, which was not clearly what was expected of her, but how she put together a plan to basically convince them that she wanted to take the next steps. And she did convince them. We have 26 videos like that, and people will say, well, why do kids want to watch videos? I don't know how many of you have kids who watch videos of kids who are doing other things, but it's something that, for whatever reason, they spend a lot of time doing. So we started off there to really get a sense of what kids were really interested in and might be prompted to want to go and investigate. We then offered something that allowed kids through games and puzzles to be able to identify the things that they are good at. And then we showed them a whole world of things that they could do with those skills and abilities and let them investigate a lot. Another program that we have is called Evolve Me, which allows students to take the next steps, to be able to connect with our partners. I believe we have nearly 40 now that allow kids to do things like take a Python class or learn how to interview, or what about how do I learn how to budget, or maybe I need a mentor. But all of those kinds of things that allow young people to be able to take that next step. And I think that what we found here is that kids are going deeper and deeper and deeper in this exploration of what it is they feel as though they can do, so that they are armed, again, to take that next step. I think we all know that kids have to have some kind of post-secondary education these days. There's no way around that. But what is it? It could be training. It could be a technical program. Yes, it certainly could be college. It could be a certificate program. There are a number of ways that young people can find their path.
And I'll say with admiration, the way you deconstruct that in the book and define path as separate from just the place you choose is really powerful. Why don't you talk about that briefly?
I think for many of us, I'm certainly one of the first ones here that I will raise my hand and say, absolutely, it happened to me. Paths wind. There's not a straight shot from here I am today, and this is what's going to happen to me later on. It's winding, it's curvy. You're going to do a whole lot of things, maybe start it, stop it, learn from something, move on to something else again. And I think really what pathways are all about is being able to figure those things out, being able to test and try things, fail. I think one of the things I've learned, and I think most of us would say, we all hate to fail. And I'm certainly saying I don't love it myself, but I'll tell you this, you learn a lot when you fail. And so I think it is the amalgamation of all that that actually gets you on that path to that, hopefully, successful future that you're looking for.
And that's something you both have in common in terms of the safe failure and the importance of that, whether it's the intermediaries supporting that, whether it's lower risk opportunities in middle school being a great place because we aren't yet making the mistakes of ranking and so forth. But one of the things that you do, Elliot, that I love in your work, but also in this book, is it's new ways, new forms, and new measures. And I want to focus on the measures part because it has always struck me in the years that we've known each other, one of the things that Big Picture and other networks like it have struggled with is people sort of default SAT, whatever, right? And sort of you measure what you treasure. And you all are now putting forward a new way to measure learning in a variety of forms, wherever it occurs. You referenced it earlier in the International Big Picture Learning Diploma. I think, did I get that? Credential. My bad. No, that's I knew I was going to mess it up. It's all right. I think it's a tremendous void you all are filling. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So many of us who are in progressive education are doing things in non-traditional ways or different ways. This is going, and we're pre-K through college, big picture. You have to just have that context. But in high school, when you get to that point in 11th and 12th grade and you're thinking about college, in a portfolio assessment system, the colleges get all these portfolios. And I was just on a call an hour ago with NCNYAC about this. That's that organization that represents tens of thousands of college admissions and high school counselors getting students into schools to look at the IBPLC. So what happens is you have your portfolio, you send it to the college, and the college goes, what the heck is this? All right, how do I know it's real? Well, a counselor at the college, at the high school talks to the college and they form a relationship. This has been going on with private schooling for years and years and years. That's the dirty little secret, one of the many that we won't talk about now because there's not enough time. But once again, Then they get to know the school, and they understand that the student that they're getting matches up with who they want. And that's a whole other story when we send our students to college, or the college is ready for them. Who they are, race, class, gender. They're not really ready yet. And they know that, but they don't do anything about it to change. And there's just a little aside. Having said that, our colleagues in Australia, we have 55 schools in Australia, and our executive director, Viv White, did something really unusual and really groundbreaking, in my opinion. She formed a partnership with the University of Melbourne, which is like their Harvard. We call them Ivies, they call them sandstones because the buildings are made out of sandstone. Anyhow, she took teacher judgment, student self-assessment, and mentor judgment on the right side of the IBPLC, the International Big Picture Learning Credential, and she formed this partnership with Sandra Milligan, and they normed it within the schools, and they normed those three things across schools. And they spun an algorithm out, and the algorithm is based on applied academics, because we credit learning that happens both in and outside of school. And we want all schools to be able to do that. That's learning to leave, leaving to learn. So on the left side of the IBPLC is a learner profile, a video, and a stackable credentials. And this credential, the IBPLC, stays with you for your life. It can get you to work, it can get you to a technical school, and it can get you to a four-year college. It's not a diploma. So the academically applied learning goals that we have, so you can get credit in and outside of school around your academics, and all those other personal qualities that we all talk about is in there, and how you use them both in and outside of school. They spun an algorithm around that, around a set of learning frames that nobody has ever done before. You send in, most schools in the United States that do portfolio assessment align to state standards. This aligns from the learning goals to a state standard. It's spun out in an algorithm, and without an SAT, a GPA, or a class rank, we've gotten our students into real good four-year colleges in Australia, and technical schools and work. Because not everybody, we have a march to a four-year college, but they really don't. Not New Zealand, Canada, or Australia. And so that algorithm now got, because it was from a highly regarded institution, was authenticated by that institution, everybody bought it. We took it to the United States now. And we're in our third year of development of that. And we're starting to gain some traction. It's not the end of this work, it's the beginning of this work, but it's a contribution to how you have to think about doing this work. If you create new forms around the new ways of doing things, you need new measures, or else you're going to end up in the same place.
Well, I think it's tremendously exciting because we can start to validate how people are achieving or developing their smarts in a variety of ways and start to represent that jaggedness in a complete picture along a variety of dimensions, it strikes me.
And I'll add, it measures not how smart you are to a test, but how you are smart. So we got Aboriginal students, refugee students, students from low socioeconomic regions of Australia into programs that they normally could never get into before. Medicine, law, art, architecture, and engineering. And they stayed in through graduation. So there's something to this.
So as we start to wrap up here, the last question I'd love to hear you both on, and we've got about 5 minutes, 45 seconds before you all boot us. So I'll start with Eugene on this, which is the policy to start to encourage more spaces to create this to occur in middle school, high school, wherever. And wherever you all want to take this, but you have this fascinating exchange in Elliot's book. I think it's between Julie on your team and and you, Elliot, about how to think about policy and different edges and so forth, but it's really ASA putting forth an agenda so there's incentives for this to actually happen in the traditional system, because right now it gets short shrift for all the reasons we know. I'd love you just to think about, where are we in the continuum, Gene, of getting better friendly policy? Are there certain things that you think this is important, less important? How should we think about that impact?
I think that we have to, the policies that we have today need to be able to encourage more work-based learning in schools. And certainly some of the things that have been happening, and certainly President Biden has been passing some laws lately about apprenticeships and allowing more apprenticeships in high schools, et cetera, and I think we need to do that. But I also think there have to be more incentives for our teachers. And I definitely think that there needs to be some policy work around that. The teachers that we've worked with, and even the teachers that I have had the pleasure of getting to know as I've been going to a number of meetings across the country, we have a lot of really innovative teachers out there who are trying to change the system themselves. They really are. They need to have the resources, they need to have the, I'm going to say, the breadth of being able to make those changes, so that learning can become something different than what we have today. And I think we all play a part in that. One of the things I talk about in the book is the fact that what I hope happens in the book is that we all come together and really start talking about this. Like, this isn't just a conversation for this room. This is a conversation with parents that should be talking to their PTOs, for school committee meetings, for really getting engaged with the schools that your young people are attending. This is all of our problems. It's an employer problem. It's a policy problem. And we really need to come together to come to solutions. Not any one place is going to make this happen. Yeah, it's, for as much as I want to say that, the work we do at ASA is what is really going to make a difference here, but it's Elliot's program, it's Corey Mann's program, it's NAF's program, I know there's some Getting Smart people in here. There are a whole load of people in this room who are contributing in these ways. We've got to come up with a better way of banding all together to basically say we can make change happen.
Yeah, so the policy piece is, we're practitioners at Big Picture, and I'm glad that ASA brings in the policy part for us, really, for all of us. How do I frame it? School is an inside job. You get paid to keep the kids inside. We got to figure out a policy to get the kids outside, and people still get paid. It's kind of that simple. That's one of the pieces. The regulation of school has gotten tighter and tighter and tighter around so many issues, and the regulation around curriculum, the march to a 4-year school, college for all, has gotten so tight where if you go into a career and technical course, you have to get A through G course approval in California to do that. That's crazy. When I work with unions, the laborers union, the carpenters union, and I go, hey, Joe, you do all the curriculum writing for the carpenters union. It's the 5th largest publishing company in the world. What's the reading level? 5th grade. What's the math level? 5th grade. Why are we waiting to 18 years old for a student who's really interested in the skilled trades to get him into a pre-apprenticeship program with either a GED or a high school diploma? We can do this earlier. So we created work to do that, but we didn't create the policy yet to do that. So we get a little bit ahead of ourselves at Big Picture, because you have to show that it works, and that's our work, but we need the Genes of the world on the policy side, ASAs on the world. Gene mentioned all those folks on the practice side. We need lots of folks on the policy side to really make this happen in a systemic way, or else it's going to happen this way, that way, and it's not good enough for so many of our young people who get left out. in not only in the conversation, but in the actual work they really want to do at that particular point in time in their lives. Because as Gene said, we do a lot of different things in our lives, so we have to realize that.
I think that's a good way to leave us because it starts to teach us how we can learn to leave and to start us where we, or end us where we began, to really crisis-proof today's learners. So join me in thanking Elliot, Washor, and Gene Eddy.